story begins. The United States was at war in Europe, and the waterfront was under military protection when Tacoma's shipping boom went bust.
Up on Puget Sound, in the state of Washington, Seattle stands as the nearest American gateway to the ports of Japan, China, Hawaii, the Philippines, and Australia.
First, the U.S. Army Siberian expedition was outfitted through Seattle. Then, outbound steel and railroad construction cargo, rerouted to Seattle, where the Public Port Commission had invested in heavy-duty gantry cranes at Smith Cove.
Seattle is getting all the plums in the shipping business.
F.H. Pettit, Tacoma's Commissioner of Public Safety, was on the Mayor's Commission studying the problem.
We know that commerce is being driven away from Tacoma every day because we have not the wharves and facilities for handling cargoes.
August Seitz was business agent for Longshore Local 38-3.
The only docks we have now are owned by the railroads and are not offering any space to the public at large. A dock to a steamship company is the same as a home to a family.
C. Arthur Foss owned the tugboat company based in Tacoma. The state made it possible for counties to form port districts in 1911. But so far, Pierce County voters had twice turned down ballot propositions to form a port district and elect commissioners. In 1918, the third try was gathering wide support.
Our future after the war lies over the seas. And with modern port facilities here, we will get our fair share of the world's commerce.
I am urging the voters of Pierce County to vote for the Port Commission on November 5th.
Emma Smith DeVoe lived in Parkland and had helped win the vote for Washington women.
Our harbor is second to none. With equal facilities, the freight would come through Tacoma docks, and the jobs would stay here.
State Senator W.H. Paul Hamas of Puyallup rallied the farm vote.
A publicly owned warehouse means more to the farmers of Pierce County than to any citizen of the city of Tacoma.
It was a landslide victory. 6 days later, World War I ended. Shops and factories closed, and the people gathered on Pacific Avenue and wound their way up here to the Stadium Bowl. 10,000 people were in these stands, and hundreds of students were here on the floor with a huge American flag, and they were parading back and forth. The audience was singing the Star-Spangled Banner. It was an auspicious moment for Tacoma and for its public port.
With a $2.5 million bond issue, Sumner farmer Charles Orton, longshoreman Edward Claus, and banker Chester Thorne directed the port's purchase of 240 acres of land on the tide flats and the construction of 3 piers and a monorail system. At the same time, the city of Tacoma developed a public railway system to connect port piers with the railroads, a detail of immense future value. The new facility helped Tacoma's longshore improve on their reputation for quick dispatch. They set a world's record loading the Edmore, the first ship to call at Port of Tacoma docks. March 25, 1921, longshoreman Maury Thorsen was there.
I'll say this, we did work. We called them at that time 7-11 gangs. We'd work from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. General cargo. Sometimes they would have the 1 and 2 hatches that would work flour from Newtown, and we'd work lumber. It was really tough in those days.
In the 20s, the port added a hammerhead crane, 2 traveling cranes, and a transit shed for Pier 2. Tacoma flour exports broke all records. Camp Lewis was selected as the site for a new World War I Veterans Hospital. President Harding spoke at Stadium Bowl, and the Puget Sound Interurban made its last run between Seattle and Tacoma. At the end of a decade of growth, in October of 1929, the economy collapsed.
Work on the old City Hall began in the 1880s, and it was finished in '93, just in time for the panic of '93 and the deepest of all depressions. The old building has seen Tacoma through many ups and downs. But in the Depression of the 30s, there was the Port of Tacoma organized, handling things out on the bay and keeping Tacoma in touch with the markets of the world and with opportunity.
In 1930, the port built United Grain Terminal and a cold storage plant a year later. As the Depression deepened, Pierce County farmers were able to sell their produce in Alaska, California, and the Orient. The Port of Tacoma helped many farmers throughout Washington State make it through those lean years. In April of 1933, 11 ships called at the Port of Tacoma. Strong shipping activity was leading economic recovery. In 1934, the rising optimism blossomed into the first of many daffodil parades. Then, widespread labor unrest closed West Coast shipping in 1934 and 35. In the charged atmosphere, Tacoma's longshores stood together.
I can recall in 1934, at the height of the turmoil on the waterfront, Harry Bridges coming to Tacoma, Washington to talk to my father. And my father and Harry Bridges talked about the necessity of keeping blacks and whites together in the labor union, not separate so the employers could break the union. That was probably the first time that's happened in the history of this country.
Goodwill between Port of Tacoma labor and management has paid huge dividends over time. In 1939, the state legislature empowered port districts to develop new industrial areas to keep the recovery growing. The 40s began with Ronald Reagan in town for the premiere of Tugboat Annie and the dedication of the long-awaited bridge over the Narrows. 5 months later, it galloped into history. In 1941, shipyards on Commencement Bay were humming at peak capacity when Japan attacked Hawaii and America was pushed into World War II. Pierce County men and women worked at factories that ran 24 hours a day. At Boeing, they built planes. They built aircraft carriers at Todd Shipyards in Tacoma and rode buses to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, where they built the Pacific Fleet. Thousands of soldiers trained at Fort Lewis, then left from Port of Tacoma piers for the Pacific War Zone. After the war, the Port of Tacoma returned to the task of attracting trade, industrial development, and jobs to Pierce County.
Industrial Tacoma and Pierce County are looking ahead with long-range planning for their expansion. One of the great natural industrial areas of our nation, approximately 5,000 acres, is afforded by the delta of the Puyallup River. The Port of Tacoma, with full support of its people, is engaged in a continuing program of creating industrial sites for lease or purchase at non-profit costs with trackage and utilities provided.
Channel 11 went on the air in 1953. It was the second television station in Washington State. Brakeman Bill went on the air the following year in 1954. You know, it fit Tacoma. The port and the railroads were a big part of our history. our image. Crazy Donkey and I are mighty proud to be part of Tacoma's can-do attitude.
I want to see us continue to use our talents to the maximum and maintain the reputation of the United States as a citadel of freedom. Thank you.
In the 60s, President Kennedy spoke at Cheney Stadium less than 2 months before his death in Dallas. Tacoma's Whalers hit it big, and Elvis appeared at Lincoln Bowl. Transcontinental railroads connected Pierce County to the east, Chicago, and New York. The Port of Tacoma connected Pierce County west to the world.
This is a good example of technology improving the relationship between the Port of Tacoma and Brown and Haley's exporting of almond roca. Because the better this stuff sells, the more ships and the more opportunities we'll have to use the Port of Tacoma in getting our product into our best export market, which is the Orient.
The port was making good on its promise to expand Pierce County's economic horizons. In the 70s, one of Alaska's largest shipping lines, Totem Ocean Trailer Express, moved to Tacoma. The port became known as the new gateway to Alaska. In the 70s and 80s, the port took an evolutionary step forward to capitalize on the growth in containerized cargo. The North Intermodal Yard was completed in 1981. It was the first on-dock rail facility of its kind on the West Coast. The port's investment attracted world-class shipping lines. Sealand and Maersk came in 1985, K-Line in 1988, and Evergreen Line in 1991. The removal of the Blair Bridge and opening of State Route 509 opened a new era of growth for the port. In 1997, Hyundai signed a lease with the port for a major new container terminal on the Upper Blair Waterway. 5 of the 10 largest shipping companies in the world now call at the Port of Tacoma.
This picture represents probably the proudest day in our lives. It's a day we set what we consider the world's record with 937 lifts in one shift, using 12 drivers, 2 supervisors, 4 housemen, and myself.
And is the Port of Tacoma proud of their record?
Very proud. Still are.
Since 1918, we've built more than a port here. We built a center for international trade and a major economic engine for Pierce County that creates thousands of jobs for the state of Washington.
On November 5th, 1918, Pierce County citizens invested in their future by voting to create a public port on Commencement Bay. Over the years, the port has worked to build a promising future for Pierce County with hard work and vision and a great deal of pride.